Got it. I want to begin talking a little bit about some of the pivotal issues that existed around the time when the modern state of Israel was formed in 1948. As you know, we had an Israeli election this week on Tuesday. And I'm talking about the topic today, partly in connection to the election indirectly. This is not going to be a political conversation, I assure you. But we are going to take a look at the question of who is a Jew, because that question is at the heart of the nature of the Jewish state. And the conversation about that, about who is a Jew, has gone on really from time immemorial, but really came into focus in the era of what we call modern Zionism, with Theodor Herzl and the people that followed, discussed both from the perspective of Jewish tradition, but also from the perspective of being a nation state. What does it mean to be a modern country that is a Jewish country, a democratic country, all at the same time? And, you know, if you look at the, call it the metaphysics of Israeli society, in a sense, the social dynamics at the heart of Israeli society, it in some ways goes back to the original conversation that took place between David Ben-Gurion and the original chief rabbi of Israel at that time, who represented primarily the Ashkenazic community coming from Eastern Europe after the war. And the conversation began with the question, so how religious is this state going to be? Because they were aware of fundamentalist, theocratic states in the world, obviously, and the complicated issues around those states, both within those states and the relationship of those states to secular democracies. And so they had a conversation, which I don't know if this is legend or absolute truth, but what I was originally taught is that they had a conversation and Ben-Gurion asked the question, and the chief rabbi answered in typical rabbinical way with a story or like a question, a theoretical. And he said to Ben-Gurion, if you have a narrow bridge, and in order to survive your enemy, you've got to cross this narrow, rickety bridge. And when you arrive at one side, you have a wagon that is overflowing, people hanging off the sides. It's just filled, packed with people. And that's one wagon. And then you have another wagon that's not quite so filled. The rabbi asked Ben-Gurion, which wagon should go first? Which wagon should have, in a sense, priority to get to safety? And in the end, they both agreed that the big wagon, the wagon filled with the most people, the wagon that was, you know, at most risk on a narrow, rickety bridge, should go first. And the chief rabbi said, and of course, those are the religious Jews now needing to find a safe haven in this new modern state of Israel. And that was how they began their conversation about creating what has been, since its inception, a bifurcated country. It is a country that is, on the one hand, controlled in many areas of the law and social discourse and life cycle issues, controlled by the ultra-Orthodox chief rabbinate in Israel, and it's been that way from the beginning. And then there's a whole dimension of Israel that is controlled by a secular system. And so it is a democracy. It's a parliamentary democracy. Those of you all probably know there are 120 members of the Knesset, the Israeli parliament. And 61 of those have to form a coalition, and then they get a chance to set up and run a government until such time as there is no longer a 61-member majority that anyone can hold together. And so what that means is, as they say, politics has strange bedfellows. You have people who will create a coalition and form a government who may have opposite views on a variety of things, but they have enough in common that they make considerations, and in order to maintain the power, they form a government. But sometimes the deference that's given to someone who helps form a government, or a party that helps form a government, can actually tilt the politics one way or the other. So Israeli political life is very complicated. At last count, there are 40 political parties, 40, right? We have 2 political parties in the United States and independents. Imagine a country, 40 political parties. And when people vote in the Israeli election, they don't vote for individuals. They vote for parties. And then all the votes are cast, and party A gets X number of votes, and party B gets X number of votes, and they create a ratio based on the votes each party gets, and that determines the number of delegates each party gets based on, dividing up the votes among the parties. And so the reason this issue has been of interest to me for a very long time goes back to really became focused for me in the 1990s. And it was during the 1990s that I was involved in a conversion process with a person who was going through essentially a traditional conversion with me as a Reform rabbi, but all the traditional rituals were done. There was a full year of study. There was a Beit Din. I'm going to go over these conditions for conversion a little bit later. And it became clear that this person wanted to make Aliyah to Israel. And that person was not going to be accepted as a Jew in the Jewish state back in the 1990s. And of course, this was very disturbing to me, as it was to many American rabbis who were not Orthodox. And a number of us became involved in that conversation between the American rabbinate and the government in Israel, which at that time was led by Benjamin Netanyahu. And then I'll just show you that I actually have a permanent record that in late October 1997, there was a bill in front of the Israeli Knesset that was going to try to finally resolve this question about conversion once and for all. And the law being proposed was going to permanently lock out, basically, non-Orthodox rabbis from the process. And so I was part of a group of 10 American rabbis who held leadership positions in the United States. And we, an overnight flight to Israel the day before the vote in the Knesset was to take place. And we had face-to-face meetings with a number of members of the Knesset and also with Benjamin Netanyahu. And we appealed to him not to support this law. Although the proposers of the law were the ultra-Orthodox members of the Knesset who made him able to have a coalition. So he had political debts to them. And though we met, spoke face-to-face, that whole encounter is a whole nother conversation, but the bottom line is, in the end, the law did not pass. It actually was tabled, and a commission was formed called the Nieman Commission. And the Nieman Commission was set up under a highly respected, I believe he was a judge in Israel, to examine alternatives so that non-Orthodox rabbis could somehow participate in the conversion process. And the Neiman Commission worked for a few years, and it made some recommendations, some which were adopted and others that weren't. And in the meantime, since 1997, there have been a long list of court cases that have come up before the Israeli Supreme Court that have, in some measure, decided these issues. Now, understand that also in the state of Israel, there is no constitution in the state of Israel. And so therefore, there's no official freedom of religion in the state of Israel. But the status of the freedom of religion is determined by the Knesset and also by local authorities who are vested with a lot of judicial and legislative power at the city level to make decisions about the religion in their districts. As well as Orthodox rabbis are, in a sense, officers of the state, just like in England, you have clergy that are also considered, in a sense, officers of the state. And so you have this very complicated social experience, political experience. And the election that took place on Tuesday, by all indicators, suggests that the next government of Israel will be led by Benjamin Netanyahu again. And that this time he formed the coalition by even more far-right religious leadership than before. And of course, the reason that becomes relevant has to do with how they envision foreign policy, because many of the ultra-Orthodox in Israel, they believe the biblical definition of the land and the borders of the land, which extend well into Jordan, according to the biblical narrative. And they, want to see the return of the people of Israel to their original indigenous land as defined in the Torah. And the thing that, again, I'm not making a political commentary on that, but just to say, because of a biblical text, we claim a certain right over other people and non-Jewish people as well, obviously is a very complicated proposition, as we've seen throughout our lifetime. And so I wanted to make this the topic today, partly because of the Israeli election, and also because this week's Torah portion, Lech Lecha, really begins to give us the biblical definition of who is a Jew. And so there's a confluence between this week's Torah portion and the election. And I think then a third issue, which we'll get to toward the end, which is the whole question of who decides what someone's identity is. And how do we navigate that? And when we get to that part of the conversation, you'll see why I raise the question. So that's the plan, and that's the background. And I'm still concerned about religious rights for all in the state of Israel, and for all streams of Judaism, and I still believe part of the ambivalence that exists today between the American Jewish community, some of the American Jewish community, and what's happening in Israel, some of that ambivalence is connected to this question of who is a Jew in the state of Israel. And the reason, last thing I'll say by way of an introduction is, if you're Jewish and you want to make Aliyah, immigrate to Israel, you're entitled to what's called the benefits of the law of return. And as won't surprise you, as Jews love to debate everything, there's been, since the inception of the state, a long debate about who's eligible for the law of return. How do you decide that qualification? And I just say, I recently had a conversion situation. I worked with this person to convert to Judaism for 3 or 4 years, going back in time. This person married a non-Jew, though became a Jew, and then married a non-Jew. They have a child, and they decided they wanted to make Aliyah to Israel. So they applied, and they did everything that was required of them, all the documentation, all the paperwork. And by the way, according to the law, if you're a Jew and you have a non-Jewish spouse, you are entitled to the benefits of the law of return, the way the law is now. But for a variety of strange occurrences, their citizenship was denied. And it probably has to do with the fact that it's a person who converted under a Reform rabbi, who then went ahead and married a non-Jew, who did all the things that raises red flags for the Orthodox in Israel. And very likely, and this has happened because the Department of the Interior in Israel controls the question of a person's status inside the state, and that is dominated by many Orthodox individuals. That individual got their case, and began to really put them on trial. Well, how Jewish are you really? And how observant are you really? And, how long have you been a part of a synagogue? And, what are you doing with your children if your wife isn't Jewish? And if you would choose Judaism because you're so committed to Judaism, then why would you go ahead and marry someone who's not Jewish? And then you see it becomes like a chain reaction of, I think, an attempt to really undignify what this family really is very happy and willing to do, to become Israeli citizens, join the army, and become part of Israeli life. And they finally, I just spoke to this. In fact, I'll tell you, I invited this person to come talk to our class today. And I understand, he said, I have such bad feelings about what we went through. I'm not ready yet. So that also is part of the background of our topic. So any questions so far? Any comments? Yeah, go ahead.
Sue, is there an appeals process for this family?
Yes, they can keep at it if they want, but they reached a threshold of, and I've talked to them about it. And even yesterday I spoke to Otis about this. I think they need a break. Their decision to make Aliyah, their family cut them off, they didn't approve of it. They went through so many consequences by making this decision of conscience. And then for them not to succeed at it, it just been painful on so many sides for them. I will talk to Otis again, but for now, they're not interested.
How long have they been trying to go through this?
Oh, like 3 years.
Wow.
Well, my question is, if they wanted to move to Israel, why didn't the wife want to convert and become a Reformed Jew herself? And that would have made everything easier.
Well, that's why we're going to have the conversation about identity and self-definition. She considers she's not a Christian. She was born a Christian. She gave up her Christianity a long time ago. She considers herself a universalist, an intellectual universalist, and a lovely, lovely person, very successful, just doesn't, she's not a joiner, and she's not looking to join a religion, but she was more than willing to raise Jewish children and to live in Israel in the context of a Jewish civilization. But she doesn't want to convert to any religion.
So is that the problem? Is it because of the wife not converting that they don't want to make?
Well, it may be the
up the
problem. It may
I
be the
think it is.
problem. It may be the problem to whomever it is in Israel that's been doing their case. But according to the law, it should not be a problem.
So I was, born in a Jewish family. My mom was Jewish and her mom and, the lineage all the way back. And I mean, would it be hard or easy for me to make Aliyah to do that application? I mean, what kind of process is it that you have to go through?
You have to demonstrate, number one, that you are Jewish according to Jewish tradition. And we're going to start with this in a second. And that's, a matter of whether you've gone through a conversion process or you're born of a Jewish mother. That's the standard in the state of Israel. It's not the standard everywhere, as we will see in a second. Yes, you could apply, and it would probably be very uncomplicated. The thing that they're really looking for is, do you have an active relationship with the Jewish religion? And meaning, do you belong to a synagogue? Do you observe Shabbat at home? Have you raised your children Jewish? Have you shown a level of commitment to Jewish life? That's what they really tend to focus on. And also just the ability to certify your Jewish ancestry.
Rabbi, I have a question.
Okay, Richard raised his hand first.
Go ahead.
It might be of interest to all of you what we had to go through as a family for my daughter to have a wedding, legally recognized wedding in Israel. She was marrying a Sephardic Jew, born in Israel and family well established. No questions on the husband's side at all. On our side, should have been no questions. My wife, we're just, in my case, second generation, and my wife, third generation, from Europe, from Ashkenazi communities, and there were no intermarriages, no conversions, no anything. But despite all that, we had to get a letter from a Chabad rabbi certifying that for the organization that would then submit our documents to the rabbinate, chief rabbinate in Israel, for approval for the wedding to take place there. Now, people who don't get this, they can go and get married at an embassy, foreign embassy, or they could go to Cyprus. His closest place to Israel where you can get married. And then you come in, you're married in another country, fine, we recognize your marriage. But you want it in Israel, it has to be recognized by the Orthodox rabbinate. And it was quite a process because of some frauds that have occurred in the New York area. I'm not going to go into all those details as much as I know of them. That they really have decided on the, get this, the Beit Din of Sydney, Australia is the final arbiter of everyone's paperwork as far as whether it will be sent on to the rabbinate. So everything I had copies of ketubas, although sadly I did not have a copy of a ketubah for my wife's, for Karen's parents, but I had for her grandparents. And anyway, I had lots of stuff, and I took bar mitzvah pictures of copies of those.
Oh, yes.
Copies of books, gift books that were given as bar mitzvah, by the synagogues to different people when they got bar mitzvahed, and a whole lot of stuff, and including everything on my side, which was pretty straightforward because I had my parents' ketubah, and I had. They were fascinated, incidentally, just as a side issue, of Karen's great-grandparents' ketubah on her father's side, which was in Yiddish, and in two forms of Yiddish, one kind of a colloquial Yiddish and another at the bottom, a very formal legalistic one. And they looked at that and they said, wow, who's seen this? in the last 100 years.
Yeah.
So anyway, we didn't, once it was with the Beit Din, and of course there was an expense involved, but not terrible. It was approved without anything. I just confirmed all the questions about were there any converts, were there any questions of anyone's being Jewish in the family, and it was approved, and then the letters were sent on, and we had a wonderful wedding outside Jerusalem. But I just want to let you know what you have to go through in Israel. If you want a wedding that's really a Jewish wedding, Muslims, Christians can get married in Israel, and those are recognized, by the state but if you want a Jewish wedding, it's got to be recognized by the rabbinate.
Let me just say, thank you for that so much, Richard. It's a perfect illustration of the original conversation with Ben-Gurion. So they've created a society in which matters of birth, conversion, marriage, divorce, death, anything having to do with the personal status of an individual is controlled, literally controlled, by the chief rabbinate in the country.
One other quick point is, and this has to do with religious law, divorce as far as a Kohen. If you were the widow or a widow of a Kohen, and I think also divorce from a Kohen, there are
Correct.
prohibitions on getting married.
There are, and those are all based in halakha, and presumably there's always an attempt to root it in the Torah itself. And so there are all these permutations that really impact people's lives. And to my understanding, there's a huge portion of Israeli society that just goes to Cyprus to get married. They don't want to bother with it. They don't want to commit to it. If you get married in Israel, they make you sign a document saying you'll be Shomer Shabbat and Shomer Mitzvot, and at least that's what I've been told. And people say, I'm not going to sign. Some people say, I'll just sign it and then I'll do what I want. And then there are a lot of people, for their own principles, say, I'm not going to sign it because it's not true. So they go to Cyprus, and then they're married. Charles.
Well, I was just going to say that I mean, I'm nowhere near Orthodox, but it seems to me that every nation state has the right to determine who can come in and who can't come in. That's the starting point. The second thing is that, are we talking about somebody going and making aliyah because they want to become a citizen of Israel, or just a permanent resident? If you want to be a permanent resident of Israel, I don't think any of these restrictions apply, but you're just not a citizen. But if you want to make aliyah and become a citizen of Israel,
Right.
then you have to go through these hoops. That's number one.
Correct.
I think that at some point, like all nation states, Israel will reach a point where it has to make a final decision about, how they're going to allow people to become citizens of Israel. And, that's always traumatic, but I think at some point that'll have to happen, because it's been, 70 years, and they still haven't figured that out. In this society, I'm not sure it'll go another 70 years before a decision is reached. And it could be that it no longer becomes a religious state that the Orthodox would like it to be. That's very possible. I don't know. I think most Jews right now in Israel are secular. I think it's like 60-70%.
That's correct.
It's not going the way of the Orthodox anyway.
Well, but again, the way the political system plays is a very small group can wield a huge amount of power and influence in a parliamentary system. And of course, that's always you have kingmakers who may have four elected people in the Knesset, and they're the kingmakers to make 61. So you have a lot of that goes on. And you're right, Charles, Israel is going to have to confront the issue. It keeps confronting the issue because it keeps coming up again and again. And but their way of dealing with this has been like incrementally. I'd like to get on with the material. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to stress to Charles and to everyone that the requirements for citizenship are much less stringent than for marriage. My daughter, all she had was when she made Aliyah, she had a letter from a conservative rabbi that said, yeah, she's Jewish, and as far as I know, and all this. And that was it. And then she lived in Israel for 2 years. And after her 2 years residence, she was offered a chance for citizenship. And that was all that was required. And, there are people coming from the former Soviet Union who have very questionable Jewish ancestry. Ethiopians, that's another issue that's been dealt with over the years. And the B'nai
We're going to look at all
Menashe.
this today, Richard. We're going to look at all this.
Okay. But I'm just saying, if to become a citizen, Chuck, it's not that hard as far as
Unless there's something quirky in your background. If you have a
Okay.
conversion, it's not easy. If you have a non-Jewish partner, it's not easy. But they made progress about these, what they consider exceptional cases. But you're right, for a Jewish person or a Jewish family with clear evidence of their Jewish background, it's not so hard. And they'd love to have us there.
Yeah. That's the point, and that's where the difference is.
Okay. Let's take a look at this. So who is a Jew? In Hebrew, it's Mi Yehudi. Mi Yehudi, who is a Jew? And it's a question from time immemorial. Oops. So I want to start with, whoops, there we go. So I want to start with just some basic demographics that people may or may not already know, but the general demographic assertion is that there are about 15 million Jewish people in the world today. There's some estimates a little higher, some estimates a little lower. What's that? I thought I heard someone. 4.5 million of them are in Israel. 7+ million are in North America. Approximately 1 million in countries that were part of the former Soviet Union, and approximately 2 million are spread throughout European countries, and then all over the world in that fact. Still always amazes me just the sheer disproportionality of there being barely 0.2% of the world's population of the Jewish people, considering our wide range of influence and creativity. Okay, let's move this. So I want to talk about here religion, ethnicity, race, nationality. These are attributes, not definitions. So for example, there are Jews on every industrialized continent. We have incredible racial diversity. So when people say Judaism is a race, it's really not a proper statement at all. We are many races. We show up in many races. Chinese, African, Indian, European, Hispanic, Persian, South Pacific. We are represented, and this is by birth, by the way, by birth, all over the planet with different racial origins. We have our simple ethnic diversity, Sephardic versus Ashkenazic. Let me just say that, we use these terms very loosely. And we talk about Eastern European, Ashkenazic, Sephardic being North African, Middle Eastern, and anything moving to the east. But in Israel, the definitions are even more specific than that. There's Sephardic, there's Ashkenazic, there's Eastern countries, a definition, a demographic definition inside Israel. And then we have, the new phenomenon of Africans showing up here and figuring out within the state of Israel how this new both racial and ethnic group fits in or doesn't fit in, can be accepted or not accepted. We have some of the most remarkable religious diversity of any religion in the world, given our size. I mean, humanist, reform, reconstructionist, conservative, Orthodox, Hasidic, renewal, agnostic, atheist. And we have people that they have their own self-identification. They identify without affiliating. The one I hear all the time is, "Oh, I'm reformed. I'm reformed." They don't belong to a synagogue, but they automatically decide, because they've decided that reformed is the simplest, easiest, least commitment oriented. I'm reformed. By the way, it should be I'm reform, by the way. It's not Reformed Judaism. I used to make fun of that, saying, yeah, it's Reformed Judaism, and we all went to reform schools, and we became reformed. It was not like that. Reform comes from the word to reform Judaism in relationship to modernity. And then there are others. You could probably think of other types of self-definition. We're going to talk about the whole issue about self-definition shortly. When it comes down to religious diversities, what is it that we do have in common among all the different types of Jews in the world? Most of us subscribe to a common religious calendar. But by the way, even that's not so true anymore. I mean, it amazes me. And it's the lunar calendar, we've talked about it. And it happens to been borrowed, really derived from the Mesopotamian calendar around 1800 to 1600 BCE. We adopted a lot of the calendar. But, even that is not sacrosanct anymore. I know many I'll call progressive synagogues, many ilks. For example, they won't celebrate Purim if it happens during the week. They'll merge it with a Friday night service because they know they'll get more people there. And so there's this sort of adaptation to outside circumstances where people are even fiddling with the Jewish calendar to accommodate their local needs. And let's face it, there are different streams of Judaism, and all have different interpretations of the origins of the Torah, of halakha, of Jewish law, and about the rituals. And remember, these interpretations tend to be based on one of two global outlooks. One is Torah from Sinai, that Jewish tradition, Jewish law, everything was revealed to Moses on Sinai. And Sinai was the pinnacle moment, and everything afterwards is a little degenerate. And the goal is to keep turning the clock back and stick to the original statement letter of the law. And that believes that the Torah is a truly fundamental document, literally from God's mind. And, there's a strong belief it is a form of Jewish fundamentalism. And that's something to respect. But we also have people who've been influenced by the Enlightenment, and particularly the documentary theory, which we studied here, that makes the case that the Torah was really written by people, reflecting their experience in their time. And so what you have is different views of how the law can be adapted, right? So, and of course, I'm a little amused by it because, so for example, in the traditional perspective, you're not supposed to turn on lights or turn off lights or generate electricity or initiate the generation of electricity on Shabbat or sacred holidays. So, but Can you use a timer? And there are some Orthodox authorities that say yes, and there are some Orthodox authorities that say no to turn the lights on and off, because it's like initiating a fire. And initiating or extinguishing a fire is one of the 39 prohibited acts on Shabbat or a holy day. And so, we have even the Orthodox that adapt the law and different views of what's allowed and what's not. The adaptation of the law came into most focus just recently during the pandemic, where the question came up, can you have an authentic minyan on Zoom? Can 10 people actually be together on Zoom? And one authority said, yes, you can. And another authority said, no, you can't, because part of a valid minyan is everyone present has to be able to hear everyone else. And it's like in Zoom, we can all have our microphones on, but when we're talking on Zoom, can we hear everybody at the same time? Whereas if you're in a room together, you can hear the collective voice more efficiently. So some authorities said, no, can't have a minyan on Zoom. Some said, yes, you can have a minyan on Zoom. This is what we mean by different views of adaptation of the law. We also have, as we mentioned before, different views of Israel among Jews around the world. Some who feel strongly it should be a secular democratic state, and others who feel we have to preserve the religious quality of the state. And there are those to the extreme who would be very happy to see Israel become a theocratic state completely governed by religious law. We have different views of the galut, of the diaspora amongst our people. The traditional view of the Torah is the view called the ingathering, that the purpose of the state of Israel is to ultimately bring all Jews to Israel and ingather Jews from around the world, ultimately into the Jewish homeland, where they can fully live out a complete Jewish destiny. But then we have modern views like the one described by Mordecai Kaplan in the 20th century, where he said, Jewish life can be looked at like a wheel. And at the center of a wheel, in order so the wheel, is stable, you have a hub of a wheel, and then you have spokes that go out to the outer rim of the wheel. He said the galut, the diaspora, is like the outer part of a wheel, and Israel is like the hub. And you can't have one without the other. Both are necessary for the stability of the wheel. And then we have different views of who is a Jew, which we're going to look at. I mean, think about it. Our civilization is anything but simple. So I want to do some sentence completions with all of you to start. And wait, I want to make sure I can see everybody. There we go. So we have some sentence completions. I want to get your suggestions of how to complete them. Number one, a Jew is someone who, complete the sentence. Just blurt it out.
Is born of a Jewish mother.
Okay. Anyone else?
Someone who has a Jewish soul.
Okay. Anyone else? A Jew is someone who
Identifies with Judaism.
identifies with Judaism. A Jew is someone who
decides that they're Jewish.
decides that they're Jewish. Well, no, I think that's a good one to include. As you can see, there are as many answers as there are people to answer, I think. A Jew is someone who believes in tikkun olam, repair of the world.
Mhm.
All right, let's go to the next one. A person is Jewish if
If their ancestors are Jewish.
Okay,
Who believes in the Torah?
who believes in the Torah? If they, a person is Jewish, if they believe in the Torah. Anyone else? Don't be shy. All right, we'll go to the next one. I am a Jew
Because I couldn't take things on faith as a Christian.
okay, good.
Rabbi, there are as many answers to these questions as there are individuals.
That's right. I agree. But but the exercises, that's not the purpose of the exercise, Charles. The purpose of the exercise actually is to, have all of us just ponder the questions for a second. And also some of the answers that come up, like Susan's answer just now, is an answer that a born Jew might never have. So it's also illustrating we answer based on our context. And so the answers become very contextual. Or Yeshim's answer, I'm Jewish, a Jew is someone who has a Jewish soul, which of course begs what question?
What is the soul?
What is a soul? Let alone what is a Jewish soul? We'll do this the last two more real quickly. The most important Jewish activity is,
Honoring Shabbat.
okay? Anyone else?
Following the golden rule.
Okay, yep.
Questioning, questioning,
Good.
questioning everything.
Okay. And the last question, just for reflection, an example of a Jewish communal standard is,
For men or women, for men having bris.
okay, absolutely.
Oh, I
Yep.
see. Oh, having a bat mitzvah, bar mitzvah.
Okay,
Good works.
okay. In order to be born Jewish, you must be born of a Jewish mother. Okay, good. All right, so, and just as a reminder of where we came from, at the beginning of our story, which we really begin to read about this week in the Torah, in the Parsha Lech Lecha, because we've read Bereshit a couple weeks ago, and that's the creation, etc. We've read Noah and all the generations that flowed out after, and we come now this week to Lech Lecha, and it's the story. It really begins the story of the Hebrews, as we shall see in a moment. Who are the Hebrews and where did they come from? I always like to remind people of this because, we can actually talk about our earliest history that's been borne out by archaeology and the studying of documents and through all kinds of excavations. And back in 1800 BCE, you have the great civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia. They both had wars with each other and they had trade with each other. And there were people who ran the trade routes. The people who ran the trade routes in this middle area, you can see where my cursor is moving right over here. In this middle area, there was a group of people who were ass caravanners, not camel caravanners, as people often think, ass caravanners who ran these trade routes. One was north by the water, by the sea, and one was south through the Judean desert. And this group that lived in the middle had a name in their ancient language, and they were called Apiru. And in that time, in this Proto-Semitic language, Apiru meant the dusty ones. It also can be interpreted to mean ones who, from the word avar, to cross over, Apiru. They were the ones that crossed over the wilderness. And they, so they became Apiru. And as time would have it, the language would evolve. And we find this in this week's Torah portion for the first time. This people, they're called Ivrim. Ivrim, and you can see the relationship in the language. You go down here, Apiru, the original name, Ivri, Ivriim, Ivrit. Ivri is a Hebrew, Ivriim are the Hebrews, Ivrit is the Hebrew language, and you can hear the alliterative relationship between Apiru and Hebrew. And so our people are derived, and the word Hebrew, first found in this Torah portion, we'll look at it in just literally seconds, is referring to this group. And we have a lot of evidence that they actually were our ancestors. So in this week's Torah portion, in Genesis 14, the first use of Hebrew is found in the Torah. And we'll go here to verse 11, and they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their victuals and went their way, and they took Lot, Abram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom, and his goods, and departed. And this is where it's for the first time we make it onto the historical stage in the literature. And there came one that had escaped and told Abram the Hebrew. And so Abram is identified here in this week's Torah portion. He's not Abraham quite yet. His name is changed after his circumcision. And the Hey, the H is added into his name because it's the letter from God's name that's added into his name. And so he's Avraham instead of Avram. But here it is, he is the Hebrew. And there obviously was an awareness in this time frame where he recognized, Melchizedek recognized that Abram was a priest of God, the Most High, and blessed him and says, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High." And so again, early on in the opening verses of our story, really, we're told that Abram is a Hebrew and that Abram was a follower of God Most High, maker of heaven and earth. So we are called the Hebrews for the book of Genesis, right to the very end. But then toward the end in Genesis 32, remember that Jacob's name is changed to Israel. And he wrestles, as you remember, in the middle of the night. And then it says, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you've struggled with God and with humans and have overcome. And it's important to understand, we go on from that point forward and we read about B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel. And, especially in Exodus, and the children of Israel wandered through the desert, and the children of Israel came upon this, and the children of Israel stood back from the mountain. And we think of it as like the children of Israel is like the mass of the people of Israel. And people forget that what that is saying, it's not the children of Israel, it's just it's based on the children of Jacob. And so it means the ancestors of Jacob become the next identified group in our story. And we are called B'nai Yisrael, and also referred to as Hebrews. When we get into the book of Exodus and even further into the Torah, we are B'nai Yisrael, the children of Israel. So we start off as Hebrews, Apiru, Hebrew. Then we come the ancestors of Jacob. But we're not done evolving, because Later on in the Hebrew Bible, we are identified as Jews. And the word for Jew in Hebrew is Yehudi. And it's from Judah, one of Jacob's 12 sons, and eventually the name of the tribe of Judah, Yehuda, one of the 12 tribes. And it became the basis of the common name of our people when the kingdom divided around 975 BCE. And it's referred to in 1 Kings, chapter 12, verse 20. And I'm going to look, I want you to understand the kingdom eventually did divide, as we know, but I want you to see how this is described. And it came to pass when all Israel heard that Jeroboam was come again, they sent and called him unto the congregation and made him king over all Israel. There was none that followed the house of David, but the tribe of Judah only. So understand, when the kingdom divided, you had really 11 tribes in the north separate themselves under the leadership of Jeroboam, and Rehoboam, who is Solomon's son, rules over the southern part of Israel and Jerusalem. But here, for the first time, the tribe of Judah as an inherent entity is identified here in the book of Kings. Then we have an example in the book of Esther, which is also important, where there's a distinction between a tribal identity and a people identity. And this is very, very important reference to the word Jew. Now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew, Yehudi, whose name was Mordecai, the son of Yair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. And that's important because now we have the word Jew used distinctively in the context of a tribal name. So you see, we begin to see an evolution of the term Jew as something separate and unique from like the original term Judah, which was the name of a tribe. It's important to note that after 586 BCE, when we went into exile, throughout the rest of the Hebrew Bible, the nations refer to the Jewish people as Yehudim, as the Jews. Whoops, did I skip that too far? No. And so think of how we've since evolved. And we have the term Jew or the Jewish people, the tribe based on the tribe of Judah. So there's the story of how we've evolved our nomenclature of who we are. The question becomes, who is a Jew in Jewish law? And according to Jewish law, a person's a Jew if they're born of a Jewish mother or convert to Judaism according to prescribed study and rituals. And the standard in most of the Jewish world is called matrilineal descent. Now, I want you to see the origin of this matrilineal descent. The Torah does not specifically state anywhere that matrilineal descent should be used through the line of the mother, but there are several passages in the Torah where the child of a Jewish woman and a non-Jewish man is considered a Jew, and several other passages where the child of a non-Jewish woman and a non-Jewish man is not considered a Jew. And in Leviticus, I'm going to go down to the bottom, in Leviticus, in chapter 24, speaks about the son of an Israelite woman and an Egyptian man as among the community of Israel, i.e. a Jew. And so we have some traditions about matrilineal descent, but at the same time, we have strong traditions about patrilineal descent, that descent would be done through the father. And in fact, in the course of Jewish history, we see concrete examples where Jewish status was conferred by the mother under some circumstances and by the father under other circumstances. For example, we read repeatedly in Jewish tradition that if your father is a Kohen, you are a Kohen. So it's kind of a bifurcated situation. If you're born of a Jewish mother, you're Jewish. And if you have a Jewish father that's a Kohen, you're a Kohen. So your status in the society is determined through the father, but your status as a Jew is defined through the mother. And we see that it's convoluted. And that's the reason why in 1983, the Reform movement decided on its own that it wanted to study the question of who is a Jew from a Reform perspective. And they did something quite incredible. After they did their research in March 1983, they produced this entire document. I just have a couple sections from it that said that a person could be born of a Jewish father and a non-Jewish mother and be considered Jewish, just like a person born only of a Jewish mother and a non-Jewish father. And this was their conclusion right here. The Central Conference, the Central Conference of American Rabbis declares that the child of one Jewish parent is under the presumption of Jewish descent. And let me tell you something, when the Reform movement did this, the Orthodox world went nuts and said, you people don't even really observe Jewish tradition in a proper way, so who are you to tamper with it? And they go on to say the presumption of the Jewish status of the offspring of any mixed marriage is to be established through appropriate and timely public and formal acts of identification with the Jewish faith and people. The performance of those mitzvot serves to commit those who participate them, both parents and children, to Jewish life. And so what they're basically saying is, what they said is, if you have one Jewish parent, mother or father, according to us, you are Jewish as long as you're raised as a Jew. You have a naming, a bris, or a naming, you have a bar bat mitzvah, you have a Jewish education. You know, you participate in synagogue life. The family has cast its lot with Judaism. Then why should we say it's just the mother? Why can't we say it's just the father? And that was a huge dramatic change in the long history of the question of who is a Jew that the Reform movement took upon itself. And by the way, took it upon itself only in North America. They did not impose this for Reform rabbis, so-called, in Israel, because in Israel would never, it was, I have to say, dead on arrival. Any questions so far? Richard?
You're muted, Richard.
Moses had a son, I think more than one, but we know Gershom. The mother was Zipporah, who was
Right.
a Midianite.
Midianite, yeah.
And was Gershom Jewish? I would say he probably was.
He was. It's
Yeah.
always assumed so.
Yeah. So. And he was circumcised. And it was
And he was circumcised.
Moses' failure to circumcise him promptly, which caused Zipporah to actually have to do it. Yeah.
Well, and remember that we know in the story, we know from the story of Jethro, that the Midianites recognized the God.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So the law of return, the next piece of this puzzle of Jewish identity, was passed in Israel in 1950, saying every Jew has the right to immigrate and has automatic citizenship and benefits specifically for any Jew who makes Aliyah. And of course, non-Jews can apply as well, but it's a much more complicated process. And the laws have been tested. The law of return has been tested a number of times. And I'm going to just point out the major cases that have gone before the Israeli Supreme Court. So brother Daniel, born Oswald Rufeisen, was a Jew who converted to Christianity during the Holocaust and had become a Carmelite monk. In 1962, now brother Daniel applied to immigrate to Israel. After being denied, he appealed to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court ruled that despite the fact that he was born to a Jewish mother, he had since converted and should not be recognized as a Jew by the state of Israel. Now, that's an interesting case, because if the case was brother Daniel converted to Christianity in order to survive the Holocaust,
Yeah, you got to convert it back.
right? He would need to convert, he would need to renounce that after the Holocaust when he returned to safety. And because he didn't do that, he took on Christianity for whatever his reason. And so the Supreme Court argued a person who renounces their Jewish faith, no matter what, is not entitled to the law of return, unless, of course, they formally reconsider themselves as a Jew because they were born Jewish. Following the brother Daniel case, a new regulation was adopted stating that individuals registered as Jews for the nationality and religion section of their identity cards must be Jews according to halakha, and they must not practice another religion. And that phrase, must be Jews according to halakha, that becomes, the pivotal, the lever around the definition of who is a Jew in the state of Israel, which is controlled by the ultra-Orthodox. Then we have the Shalit case. Benjamin Shalit married a non-Jewish woman. Since he was an Israeli, she and their children automatically received Israeli citizenship. The two considered themselves atheists, but part of a Jewish nation, and wanted their children's identity cards to state Jewish for the nationality designation, but remain blank for religion. See how we are? See what we do? The Ministry of the Interior wanted to keep both designations blank. So the case was appealed to the Supreme Court of Israel, and the Supreme Court actually ruled in Shalit's favor, acknowledging that a person could be a citizen, the state of Jewish for citizenship, and not have to declare a religious identity on their on their passports. So that decision, Shalit decision, caused a lot of controversy. And in 1970, an amendment to the law of return passed stating that only persons born to a Jewish mother or who had converted to Judaism were allowed to immigrate to Israel under the law of return. They thought they were simplifying the matter, but they did not. Then we have the Miller case. Shoshana Miller in 1980 tested the new amendment. She applied for citizenship under the law of return as a Reform convert. I had a similar case later. And she appealed to the Supreme Court, which ruled that she should be granted citizenship in what became known as the Miller precedent. And this opened the door for non-Orthodox conversions to be considered valid for the purpose of Aliyah. That is, non-Orthodox conversions done outside the state of Israel. So since 1970, the law of return applies in the following ways. Born Jews, according to the Orthodox interpretation, Jewish mother or maternal grandmother, those with Jewish ancestry, having a Jewish father or grandfather, converts to Judaism, Orthodox, Reform, or Conservative, and Jews who've converted to another religion are not eligible under the law of return, even though, according to halakha, a person who renounces their Judaism is still technically Jewish. They're called apostate Jews, but they are still considered Jewish, but not according to the law of return. And so, we get to the question of halakha and conversion. And in Israel, conversion is conducted with two parts. The Talmud Torah, you have to spend at least a year studying Judaism experiencing a whole year of the holidays, and then you go before a Beit Din that will question you about your decision and your choice, then you are circumcised. If not, or you have what's called a hatafat dam brit, a man is already circumcised. They draw a drop of blood, the mikvah, immersing in the mikvah, and then you get the signed documentation. Tradition says you should turn away a person interested in Judaism, converting, you should turn them away 3 times. And if they come back a fourth time, then you should welcome them and bring them through the process. One of the questions that's come up is what constitutes a kosher Beit Din, a religious court? And in Orthodox circles, it means 3 ordained rabbis, and one of the controversies in recent years has been, we have some Orthodox rabbis who are considered kosher enough and some Orthodox rabbis that are not considered kosher enough. And so the question of a kosher Beit Din has been controversial among the Orthodox. In the non-Orthodox world, I've seen everything from a community that has no rabbis, where they have 3 leaders of the community make the Beit Din. Or a rabbi will ask the president of the synagogue and another congregational leader to make the Beit Din. Or sometimes rabbis will ask other rabbis in the area to come together and have a Beit Din. So we have this attitude that conversion is not encouraged in Jewish tradition, and we have a history of a prohibition against proselytizing. And understand where that came from. That came from the Roman Empire, the period of the Roman Empire, where converting to Judaism or teaching someone Judaism for the purpose of conversion was against the law and punishable by death. And so the rabbis at that time said, our first responsibility is to protect people's lives, and they forbade conversions, basically completely, during that time period. And it was carried on through history, the attitude of, if someone wants to become Jewish, we have to tell them right up front how dangerous and challenging it can be to be Jewish in this world. And you need to tell them that 3 times. And if they still come back, now their eyes have been opened to the realities of anti-Semitism, etc., then we should do everything we can to help them. But there's another thing that's emerged, and I am one of the few rabbis, as far as I know, who has a different perspective. And that is, yes, we have a tradition of discouraging people 3 times so they can demonstrate their commitment and their desire. But at the same time, we're such a small group of people, and the vast majority of people in the world are, in terms of surveys, what's your religion? They say none apply. They're the none apply people. And they're floaters, or they're non-believers, or they're agnostic, whatever. And I have always believed in the last 10 or more years that it would be good for the Jewish community, while not promoting conversion, putting out the program, try Judaism, you might like it. Try Judaism, you might like it. Is that promoting conversion? Not exactly. Are we telling people traditional proselytizing, what you do is wrong, we've got your answer? No, that's not what I believe is the right thing at any time, to tell people what they believe is wrong. But that there's nothing wrong with us saying to people out there who really, even if they're unaffiliated, try Judaism, and we can offer classes like that, 3 or 4 classes once or twice a year, where people can come in and learn about just the fundamentals, the basic rubrics of our religion. And then if they have a desire to take it further, then, they connect with a rabbi. The last thing I wanted to put up today for discussion is in a 2011 study of the Jews of New York, a very small group of Jews made itself very, very conspicuous, actually, not just more conspicuous. These are self-identifying Jews whose parents are not Jewish and who have not undergone any form of official conversion. And these people usually have a Jewish family member, it could be a Jewish spouse or a grandparent, but the path leading them to Judaism is not one the Jewish people has traditionally recognized. And these individuals clearly exemplify the belief, very much in line with core liberal values, that the individual should be the only one deciding what he or she wants to be. And if they say they are Jewish, can the community say otherwise? To me, that is the cutting edge question right now in the world on the issue of Jewish identity, on the issue of Jewish status. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
I find it absolutely fascinating and so important. I mean, and I don't know that there will ever be a way to resolve or have any agreement, because there are people who are going to rely on the law, right? All the historical, traditional Torah, all those law definitions. And then there are going to be other people who absolutely believe that they, can identify because that's how they feel. And I don't know how do you ever resolve between those two different points of view? And I see it in other aspects of life right now, having teenagers and, people identifying as all different things, and who am I to argue, I don't feel like I can, state to another person that who they identify as is not true. If that's how they feel, that's how they believe, I'm not going to argue with another person. But this boy.
Again, Rabbi, doesn't it go back to what I said earlier? In societies such as ours, democratic society, if you want to be Jewish and do or do not follow all the precepts of Judaism, who cares? In a state where they want to define who is allowed to come in or under what circumstances you can come in, that's up to the particular nation state. So if Israel, for better or for worse, wants to restrict immigration to their country for whatever their reasons are, okay, it's probably not a good idea in the long run, but if they do it, they do it. In our society here, if you want to be Jewish, you can participate or not as much as you want in Jewish life, and in a Reformed congregation, nobody's going to care. In fact, they're going to welcome you because you're paying dues.
Well, go ahead, Yeshim, I'll wait.
There are so many different aspects to this question. I mean, there's just, and it varies according to the circumstances of each person. I mean, I agree with you, Chuck, is it that absolutely, if every country has a right to decide who can, come and live within its borders and be a citizen. And I know, because here's another big condition, I have 3 citizenships, and I know I have to apply and fulfill the requirements of each of these countries, and Israel should be no different. Israel is not one of them, but that's different. That's a whole other, way of living, even though, of course, Israel and Judaism are more intimately connected than most other countries. They're, a citizen's religion. But on the other hand, there are so many different, for example, in my case, the self-declared Jew looks like it's close to me. However, I have Jewish heritage on both sides, but because I come from the lands of the Ottoman Empire, both my father's and my mother's side, there are so many instances of forced conversion of orphans or times of war to survive. And yet there's always has been an element of we don't fit in with the others, even though, you know, we are now part of Turkey or part of the, you know, we don't fit in. And then there's so much family, you know, there's so little family to say, I didn't know my, you know, grandparents really, do you know what I mean? Or their parents, because everybody came from different parts. So what did that leave me? That left me with certain, at least, you know, values of Judaism, you know, traditionally studying and, you know, traditionally knowing that somehow you have to be careful. I mean, there was a lot of caution about how you interact with the outside world. Do you know what I mean? In terms of how much you declare of yourself. So there were all this fear of being different and yet trying to, that was passed on, yet trying to pass on, you know, live in the larger society. But it's a very lonely way to be. And as somebody who has traveled, you know, all across the world, but also philosophically, I finally realized the only religion that appeals to my mind as well as my heart and my soul is Judaism. And I have genetic inheritance and I have the soul inheritance. Now, I cannot say, although I can pull up the records, you know, Hard and Ottoman Empire, to prove the Jewish heritage, but I wouldn't fit into the Israeli definition of, you know, proving with paperwork. Do you know what I mean? DNA proves it. My personality and my beliefs prove it. So what can I do as a person? I decide, just like the self-declared Jews of New York, you know, yeah, I'm going to practice Judaism. However, I realized if I wanted to live in Israel, I'd have to convert, because that would be respecting the law, the sense of orthodoxy. You know what I mean? Does that clarify my thinking in all of this?
That's very helpful and very well. Can I ask you a hard question?
Sure.
And it's not my personal question really, but it's, you know, there's this tension in Jewish tradition
Mhm.
Or in Jewish history, you know, between tradition and change.
Mhm.
And so I wonder what you have everything in your heart, soul, and in your mind. You have your affinity, your belief, your ancestry. So why wouldn't you want to remove all questions about your status
Mhm.
by having a simple ceremony?
Well, I actually, you know, asked the rabbi here, you know, I asked them, I said, do you want me to convert? I'm ready to convert. If that is going to be, oh no, you don't need to do that. So that put me in another situation apart from what I lived with, you know, when I was in Montreal. I had a boyfriend who was the assistant director of Hillel, and we lived together. And there came a time when his parents really pushed me to say, you got to have an Orthodox conversion, because God willing, if you have children, we don't want any problems. And I said, I'm an honest person. I'm not ready to lie to Orthodox rabbis that this is the only, you know, thing I will believe in at this age, you know? So,
Right, of course.
and it destroyed my relationship. It destroyed my life,
Yep.
you know? I
It's,
mean,
and
it's just,
that's why I'm looking at this, the idea of the ceremony.
yeah. I
As-
would do it
as-
very happily, and I probably will at some point, you know?
And again, it's not because anyone should question your status or your commitment or anything. No one should. It's no one's business. But it's to me, having conducted ceremonies like this with people in similar situations that you described, it was an affirming experience. It was
Yes.
more of a ceremony of affirmation that you're no longer peripheralized. You no longer have to like wonder anything. Not that you necessarily wonder anything about yourself, but you do wonder what other people are thinking, right? And you don't, and that's an intrusion. It can be an intrusion. So I feel like it can be a very affirming experience to go through it, and very beautiful. it's a way of coming full circle. You started, you are Jewish in your history, you're Jewish in every other way, and you come around and, once a person is Jewish, they're Jewish. There's no other way around it. I mean, it's being a Jew I wish people born Jewish would be Jews by choice,
Yeah.
right? And that's the term we use now, Jews by choice. And, in a way, that's kind of what you describe, is that, you could have chosen a whole number of other possibilities.
And I tried. It
Right?
just didn't feel right. It didn't
Right?
feel right. It doesn't feel right. So that's all I'm going to say. It just doesn't feel right. That doesn't mean I'm not open to Zen Buddhism and, understanding the beauty of the Quran or the, Catholic Church. But I was a traveler. I traveled through trying to understand, the precepts of the Catholic Catechism, the understanding of, Quran, in terms of mysticism. None of it fits to my
Right.
mind and my heart at the same time, and my soul doesn't rejoice in the same way when I read the Torah. I feel like I'm entering a beautiful palace lit in every single way, and I feel like I am welcome back. I mean, I feel very, very it's a beautiful feeling, and I cannot describe it any other way. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, I lost my train of thought.
It's all right, but I just want you to know, I want you to know something, that knowing you as I do, to me, it would be the greatest honor
I would love to.
to be part of that.
Yeah, I would love to. I don't know
Rabbi,
how.
as a teacher. Well, maybe we can talk offline about it, maybe, if you're
Yeah,
willing. 'Cause
yeah, I'd love to.
I want you to do it, not for the community's sake. I want you to have it, just for you.
Yeah, thank
Right?
you. Thank you. And to tell you, I'm been seeing with the Chabad rabbi, Rabbi Lefertov, and he's been really, really good and kind to me in terms of, we're studying the every week, Sundays, and there's me and a physicist from Los Alamos and an Israeli young man, and so it's a wonderful group, and he's been very kind too. But I never brought this up. But he does know that I was Jewish and I wasn't, Jewish. Jewish. Do you know what I mean? Because I
Of
was
course.
on my own since the
And you
yeah.
just, with perfect authenticity, it's like, none of that, I think, is even open for question. It's more like, what I related to people who say, I don't need to get married. I'm with my
Yeah.
partner and we're very connected. So what does the ceremony change? Like, we've heard, particularly in the 21st century, it's just a convention. It's just a convention. It's governments can count. So whatever reasons why I don't need a marriage, and I don't even talk about a license. I still. It's like
Commitment.
it's not
I
even
like that.
ceremonial. It's a way of realizing something important, and that's a relationship set aside, apart from all other relationships. So yeah, rituals, and it's and just for those two. And it's that I say this to you. You have just add as symbolic of what you've shown life.
Well, thank you for offering, because I think I would be better. to
And
tell you
it's
the
also,
truth.
let's
Yep.
face it, I have to say this. I think you all would agree with this. You've chosen Judaism, but Judaism and the Jewish community chose.
Oh, thank you.
And you brought so much to us. I mean, it's just, we know it. I hope we know it. And
Thank you.
I didn't expect we would be having this conversation with this.
I just
I think it's so
no,
cool.
hit the core of like all
It goes right, It goes right to the heart of so many things.
Yes, it
just
does.
All right, we'll
Yes,
talk
it does.
offline.
Okay,
Richard?
great.
I just wanted to mention that the current Israeli ID does not mention religion on it. This is my daughter's ID card, and I read through it. I know enough Hebrew. Nowhere does it state religion. Just her name, her address, her my name, Karen's name, and the expiration date for the ID, but nowhere does it, and that she was born in the United States, but nowhere does it say religion. Mentioned that earlier, Rob, about the IDs.
Yeah, and it has evolved over time for sure.
yeah.
I'm gonna just put up one last thing here before we finish up. But tough questions I think we've talked about in one way or another. But this last thing is I found a definition of a Jew online, and it's always fascinating. And so I want to know what you think of this statement. Anyone who repudiates idolatry is called a Jew.
Yeah.
Who was that from?
No, I apologize. I don't remember. And I didn't write it. Bad for not writing.
Of course, that's a big, that's not everything.
Right. Any final comments, questions? Well, thank you, everybody. You sh-
Shabbat
Thank
shalom.
you. Shabbat shalom.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, this was great, really. Thank you.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Yeah, you too.
Bye.
Take care.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Bye, Sherry.
Ah.